Man, do we have quite a few things that we need to get into here Tuesday. It's first hoops action we're going to see in the new year, and we got a lot of things that we kind of have to put in our layers and get knocked out over the next 25, we'll call it 35 minutes. No better person to chat with when it comes to tonight's matchup with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And for a lot of Tennessee fans, as we welcome you inside the checkerboard chatter here on the Ball Report on your Tennessee Rivals page, they've kind of had Mississippi State highlighted on their calendar, not only because of just kind of the competition they bring to the table, but in fairness, you see this team twice in 2 weeks. Not only do they meet tonight at Thompson-Bowling Arena, but then don't look now, but 2 weeks later, they're going to meet on this day coming up on the 17th. Yeah, I guess that would be 14 days of the 3rd. That would be down in the hump. And we got to learn a little bit more about this Mississippi State basketball team. That's why we called in Jack Byers from over at the Bulldog Blitz. Jack, who's actually joining us from Tampa, Florida. Busy boy you've been, Jack. And man, what a happy ending things came for the football program. A nice little dub in the ReliaQuest Bowl over Illinois yesterday. First and foremost, happy holidays, and kind of set the scene for us. What's it like in Tampa, Florida right now with this football program?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty exciting win for them yesterday. Obviously, it was very emotional, just for them this whole bowl prep. But for them to pull out the win, you could really just see how, happy those players were to just kind of, get the win to honor Mike Leach.
Before we get into basketball, do you mind taking us kind of in what it's been like the last couple of weeks? Because I made a comment on my program that I think the only game out of the entire bowl season where more fans across the nation will be cheering for the opposition would be probably now the TCU Georgia national championship game,
Yeah.
because they don't want to see Georgia repeat. But man, if it seems like swing your sword, it seems like any kind of disciple of Mike Leach wearing the state hoodies on the sideline. It's been a very emotional time for the unexpected passing of what I believe to be one of the true treasures in college football. I never got a chance. I was never lucky enough to have a chance to come across Mike Leach. Can you kind of not only take us back through, I guess, the last 3 weeks, but can you kind of take me through your lens, the insight of covering a man like Mike Leach in the Mississippi State football program?
Yeah, well, I mean, just first of all, Mike Leach was just an incredible man to cover. I mean, he'd always, he was probably the smartest man that I've ever talked to. Like, he's known for, all those witty jokes and whatnot, but I mean, he'd always, just come up with all these ideas. And I'm just like, where are you getting this from? Like, how do you think about all this stuff? But yeah, he was really just a joy to cover. But, I guess just going back 3 weeks ago when we heard that he was, going to the hospital, they had immediately named Zach Arnett the interim coach. And that's when you knew that it was going to be very serious. And, obviously you don't want to think about it in that moment, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking about how are they going to keep together this signing class? How are they going to keep it together, this roster? And, they end up promoting Zach Arnett to the full-time head coach the day after he passes away. And, Zach Arnett did a fantastic job holding together that roster. I think they only had one portal addition or portal subtraction after Arnett had been named head coach, and that was like a fourth string DB. And, they did a really good job finishing on signing day. Probably the guy that was the biggest target in their class, who they battled LSU for, and Isaac Smith. But then just for bowl prep, I don't know how this bowl prep goes if this doesn't all happen. I think if it's just your normal bowl game, I think we're seeing a few guys, that played in this game probably opt out to go play for the NFL. I know Emmanuel Forbes is one of them. When we talked to Will Rogers last week specifically, Will Rogers had said that Emmanuel was going to opt out. And, after all this happened, Emmanuel was like, hey, I need to go out on this field and, win one last game for my team. So I think it was just, the players, it sucks. And they were, down for a little bit, but they were fired up to go play and go win for their coach.
Illinois posted one of the best defenses in college football. Did you kind of get this? Man, I don't want to kind of color this as a Disney ending, but watching that game snap for snap for vested interests, wink, wink, as many people do now these days on their sports book betting apps, and watching how that game kind of beautifully chaotic came to an end yesterday, a ball, lateral, bounce right in your hand, scoop and score will go the other way. Did you kind of look at it like myself and so many others did across the country of, Of course, chaos ensued to end this game because that's the way Mike Leach would want to have it. Do you look at things that way? Because I can tell you this morning here in Knoxville, Tennessee, on another SEC station, so many people, whether it was tweet, text, or phone calls, were just, of course, this messy pancake or painting or this beautiful chaotic ending would come right on the tail end of the late, great Mike Leach.
Well, I mean, you can't have a normal ending. I mean, well,
Right?
how do you have a normal ending? You have to have a chaotic ending with, just whatever this team the last couple of years have had a few chaotic games. So, I think that was the funnest way for them to go out and just, win that game and obviously cover the spread for a few people that had that. Although I think if you did lay 3.5, you're probably an idiot because you could have gotten 2.5 for the last week and a half. But
Jack Byers, also betting expert. This is fantastic. See, we got to have you on more often. Continue. I'm sorry.
yeah, well, yeah. My dad worked in Las Vegas for a long time, so I've been kind of ingrained in that knowledge for a little too long for me. Probably at too young of an age.
Jack, betting shark, Jack Byers is what we're going to refer to you as moving forward.
All right.
Mississippi State football, just quickly as we put a nice little bow on this, where do you believe the expectations are? Again, you have a defensive coordinator who's now taken over, as now the interim tag's been removed. He is officially the head coach. The battle of the SEC West, the most competitive division in college football year in and year out. You know what Alabama's going to bring to the table. LSU, obviously under a first-year head coach, they immediately shoot past expectations. Where's Jimbo? So you get an extension when you look at the likes of what's happening right now with Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss. Auburn settles their situation, bringing in Hugh Freeze. I know I'm sure I can mention other people, but where do you believe Mississippi State is at right now, realistically?
I mean, it's hard to name an expectation right now because, I mean, first of all, we don't know who's running this offense next year. I'd like to think that they're probably going to stick with the air raid, going with someone in that tree. But there's also been some which the Briles that's at Arkansas. I can't remember if it's Art or
Kendall Briles.
Kendall Byers. There's been some talk about him, and that would be quite the change in offensive scheme if they went with him. So it's kind of hard to put an expectation on right now without knowing who that offensive coordinator hire is right now. But I think you just look at what their 2023 schedule looks like right now. It's pretty favorable. Last year this year's season they had Georgia in the cross division, and you get to swap that with South Carolina. So that's pretty huge. I think they have 8 home games, and they've been very good on their home field recently. So I do think the schedule's a little more favorable for them next year. But yeah, like you mentioned, I think Auburn should be better than what they were. Obviously, I don't know what A&M's going to look like, but I'd probably say they'll probably end up similar to what they did this year.
Jack Byers, he's joining us on the Bulldog Blitz. I appreciate you because I when I reached out to you, I said, man, let's talk hoops. And then all of a sudden I'm like, Jack, let's talk football right out of the gate. Now let's cross that bridge. Let's talk about a program right now led by Chris Jans, look, I watched this guy in Aggie land. That would be New Mexico State Aggie land, not Texas A&M Aggie land. Just crumble up so many brackets, this hard-nosed, this – no pun intended, but this bulldog mentality, you could see it out of his players whenever they were playing different opponents out in the, I believe they're in the Mountain West now these days. So please don't quiz me on where New Mexico State is now these days. The point is this. I watched this Mississippi State basketball team and I went, my goodness, they play lockdown defense very similar to what Tennessee does. I've been calling this a rock fight now for 3 days. Give us a little bit of an insight. This Chris Jans team, who out of the gate unfortunately stumbled against an Alabama team, and Tennessee having their own kind of struggles, but they found a way to pull things out in Oxford against Ole Miss last week.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a defensively oriented team, just with some of what they do. They're not just because they don't necessarily have that talent on the offensive side, especially with their guards. So that's kind of the way that they have to win basketball games. And they've got some pretty, gritty defenders, some really long guys. DJ Jeffries and Cameron Matthews are their 2 forwards, and those guys are, really long guys, really guys that are going to come in and rebound and disrupt the passing lanes and really make guys make tough shots. And you got a few guards that are pretty gritty, just getting in those passing lanes. Shaquille Moore, someone who's been racking up a lot of steals for them, and Deshaun Davis is another guy who can really get some steals. And it's just, the collective as a whole has been really good for them defensively. But I think the biggest thing for them is, that like grittiness, that toughness, it works on the other side of the court as well. It was because while they're not the most talented offensive team, they're a team that gets a lot of offensive rebounds, and some of those second chance points have kind of helped them stay afloat on offense when the offense as a whole is just not making shots.
Yeah, it's funny too because when I was talking about this program this morning, I said to myself, I would just want to look back at this Alabama game as a whole. And the rebound part you brought up, I found to be quite remarkable. This was an Alabama team. We were essentially having a discussion. Who's been the most impressive team in the SEC? Who should be flirting with perhaps maybe a top 5 or top 3 ranking, seeing that Purdue fell last night? By no means do I believe Alabama should be the number 1 team in the land. I'm not saying that whatsoever. What I'm saying is the way Alabama has competed this year. This is an Alabama team who has knocked off Houston. Watching Alabama last week against Mississippi State, out rebound a Bulldog program. But this defense is so stingy. Alabama also shot dang near 50% from the field, shot dang near 40% from deep. Those kind of numbers you don't see that often. Even when you go back to a Chris Jans program all the way back at New Mexico State, you just don't see it that often. That's why I was quite surprised by the outcome, because those are impressive stats against a Mississippi State defense that will lock you down for 40 minutes of basketball.
Yeah, and I think that Alabama was an interesting matchup for them because Alabama is obviously a team that plays very fast paced. They're a team that really wants to run the floor. I think Mississippi State struggled with that a little bit. I think they got a little gas, but it was an interesting game for sure. I think the biggest thing Mississippi State struggled with was some of Alabama's length. I mean, obviously Charles Bediako, we've seen him in the SEC last year, and that's someone who's just got some crazy length. And one of their freshmen, Noah Clowney, another big forward that just kind of gave them some really tough time when Mississippi State was on offense, and Tolu Smith, our Mississippi State's big man, just really struggled. And in Mississippi State, I think the biggest thing for that game is Mississippi State shot 18 of 36 from the free throw line. Like, I don't know how sustainable that is. I don't know what was going on last week with that, but I think that was what really killed them. But yeah, I think they did struggle with Alabama's kind of fast tempo a little bit.
Overall tonight, I know you just mentioned a few players that have already shined this year for Chris Jans' team, but who's the one tonight where if Mississippi State is to be flirting with the upset, if Mississippi State is to be coming into Thompson-Bowling Arena and kind of upending Tennessee, X factor is blank?
I mean, Tolu Smith's been your best player all season, and he had that down game at Alabama. If Mississippi State wants to roll into Knoxville and pick up an upset, Tolu Smith's going to need to get back onto his game, and that's that back to the basket, out strength you down low, get finishes inside. That's his game. He's not someone who's going to stretch you out, so he's going to need to, really, be focused, really need to be locked in with that. I know Tennessee's got some guys that can, throw that length at him. Maybe he'll struggle with that like he did against Alabama. We'll see, but I think he's really the guy you need to get going.
When you look at Mississippi State this year, there's so many schools who out of the SEC are going to be ranked inside and outside of the top 25. What do you believe the realistic kind of expectation is for Chris Jans this go around? I mean, again, defensively, just ask Tennessee. You can go as far as your defense will take you. Are they in a similar stance? Stats-wise, they might be similar, but do you believe that Chris Jans is in a position where he can only go as far this year as his defense will take him?
I think so right now because I think the team that he took over, he had to get some transfers and whatnot, and I just don't think they have that, guard that can just kind of get you a bucket. They don't have that guy. They don't have that consistent three-point shooter as well, which, I think that kind of limits what you're able to do. I think going into the year, the expectation was get to the NIT and just be competitive. They've been that so far. And then I think the expectations obviously got a lot higher. They got ranked in the AP poll, after winning down in Fort Myers. They beat Marquette in Utah. And, the expectations got a little higher. But they've started to tamper a little bit. They lost that Alabama game, but they also lost to Drake. And they've squeaked by Nicholls State. And they squeaked by Jackson State. They're starting to falter a little bit. And I think the teams are starting to pick up, hey, this team doesn't have a whole lot of talent on offense. We've seen a few teams throw a zone at them, which they've really struggled with, whether it's just hitting the outside shots against the zone or or just creating, plays against the zone defense. They're struggling to penetrate it and, find an open man. And I don't know if that's what Tennessee's approach is going to be. I think Tennessee has enough talent on defense where they don't have to do that. But I do think that, there's been some adjustments made to Mississippi State these last couple of weeks where they've, haven't been at quite as great. So I do think the expectation right now, maybe you squeak into the tournament, maybe you're in an IT team. I still think that's a successful first year of this tenure. Hopefully next year they can, find, some guards that can play, really well on the offensive end, and you can kind of springboard this into a very successful second season for Chris Jans.
Does Mississippi State have depth behind Tulu Smith? What I mean by that is if by chance tonight Smith does not get back on track, the thing that clearly is going to be a key to victory for Mississippi State, do they have the players that you believe that can hang with Tennessee tonight?
I mean, they have some dudes that can score a little bit. Like we've seen flashes of certain guys like DJ Jeffries, they're forward, and Tennessee's seen him when he was at Memphis a few years ago. And he's someone who's kind of like a point forward type. He can shoot it a little bit. He's kind of inconsistent, but he is someone who can get pretty hot. Like I mentioned, just inconsistency. We've talked about they've struggled to shoot the ball, but Eric Reed Jr., who's a transfer from SEMO, he's shot the ball really well at times, and other times he hasn't. Maybe he gets hot tonight and hits a few threes. Maybe he'll hit 4 or 5. Maybe he'll hit 0. I don't know. But that's another guy I would look at to maybe get hot to keep them in the game.
How often do you look at a Mississippi State team like the one that's been put together this year and think, okay, it's kind of an enigma, it's kind of a crapshoot? Whenever you've looked at teams like that in the past, and maybe I'm putting you on the spot here, but just kind of your impressions. Usually, whenever it's we'll see what we get out of this Mississippi State team, have those teams usually flourished or have they kind of maybe crashed to the ground? Because there's some teams they work so much better. Some teams work better as the underdog. We don't like to be talked about. We like to fly under the radar. When you look at Mississippi State, there are some people who look at them this year going, game in and game out, you're either going to get a dominant performance or you might get a stinker. Do you believe watching Mississippi State, and maybe it's difference between with Jans compared to Ben Howland and somebody in the past, but thus far, do you believe that the crapshoot game has been more positive or been more negative for Mississippi State?
This year, it's definitely been more positive. I just look back into those games in Fort Myers against Marquette and Utah where they really had some pitiful offensive performances. I think they won one of those games shooting 35% from the field. It's just one of those things where, your defense can keep you in games if they're really locked in, if they're really playing well, if they're really rebounding well, things like that. Going back to last year, their defense wasn't, quite what it is right now, and they would lose some of those games. I vividly remember last season, there was games where they were leading, pretty late, at Alabama, at Florida, and they just kind of faltered late just because, different things happened. I think Auburn was another one. They had Auburn on the ropes last year and, some interesting coaching decisions and they faltered. So I do think they're, more equipped for these games this season just because of what their defense brings to the table. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say what kind of game you are going to get from them.
And Jack Byers, a few more questions with him from Bulldog Blitz. So Jack, I want to ask you right now, it's January. With so much kind of questions up in the air with the unfortunate passing of Mike Leach that we've already touched on this year, some programs would say yes, others would say not so much. Do you believe, and maybe this would be a question that Chris Jans would have to answer himself, do you believe there's a little bit of added pressure this year, not only just with the basketball program, but maybe even from the baseball program as well, that perhaps maybe seeing that Mississippi State football is having to take a step back, kind of recollect themselves, reset, and then move forward? Do you believe that perhaps maybe the added pressure to win has maybe been turned up the thermostat just a bit? Maybe not so much for Jans, maybe more from a baseball standpoint, but the athletic department as a whole thus far.
Yeah, I was going to say right before you mentioned baseball, when you were wording my question, I was like, yeah, the pressure is probably on the baseball team. Because, I mean, this is where the Mississippi State fan base has been really invested, for a long time. And, last season, Mississippi State finishes last in the SEC West a year after winning a national title. It's kind of crazy. And you can point at a lot of different things, whether it's just pitching injuries or unclutch hitting and whatnot. But, I think Mississippi State baseball this season has some, pretty high expectations. I don't think the expectations to win a national title again, but I think it's to hopefully host a regional at least. I think with some of the transfers that they've brought in and a very talented freshman class, they did a fantastic job, keeping some guys away from the MLB draft. And I think it's a talented team this year. I think, obviously the SEC is pretty loaded in baseball, but I do think that the pressure really is on the baseball program rather than the basketball program, just because the expectations of those two programs historically.
I want to bring it back to football just momentarily. What do you believe yesterday's win in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Illinois does for this program? Seeing that momentarily they are going to take a reset step back. And look, maybe the question doesn't have an answer just yet because there are still so many of those other questions that you kind of started this chat with. Where do you believe kind of right now? Because I understand with so many SEC programs, it does start and begin with your football program. What do you believe yesterday did for the confidence, not only for the fan base, but for the players who are going to be coming back next year, not only for the coaching staff, but helping answer some of the questions of you are the guy, offensive coordinator, you are the guy, play caller, to help push us into the future and continue to make Mississippi State football kind of excel and hit that escalator.
Yeah, I think that yesterday, I think we've seen a lot. I mean, we had buy-in on Zach Arnett already. I
Yeah.
think yesterday just kind of elevated that. Obviously, we all know Illinois was a fantastic defensive team, and they had a few opt-outs, but it was still a very good win for them. And I just think that the players they're fired up to play for Zach Arnett, and just the fan base in general. I think they really like him, so I think that kind of gets you a little bit excited about next season. Like I said, you kind of have to wait for the offensive coordinator hire. Some of they're really shaking up that offensive staff. I believe yesterday, both wide receiver coaches, the running back coach, and possibly the offensive line coach aren't going to be back. So it's going to be a huge offensive shakeup for them. And I don't know. I just can't really put expectations on this team until I know what that's going to look like. I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, but
No,
it's just hard to envision seeing what they look like on the field without knowing what kind of offense they're running.
last week, Ole Miss almost pulled off the upset against Tennessee down in Oxford. Can you look into your crystal ball and can you give me an idea, envision how things play out for 40 minutes tonight when Mississippi State makes the trip up to Knoxville?
Yeah, I think Mississippi State's offense is just going to be lacking a little bit behind. It is going to be a tough defensive battle. I'll say Tennessee wins this one by 8.
But not 10.5.
Not 10.5. I didn't even look at the spread, I'll be honest.
Oh, no, come on. Vegas insider Jack Byers knows exactly what the spread is tonight in Knoxville. Be honest with me.
No, because I just woke up and got in the shower and I didn't look last night. So I'm actually being serious. I didn't look at what the spread was, but I guess that would be a Mississippi State cover if they did win by 8.
A Mississippi State cover. You heard it here first from
I'm
the
not betting on it though.
from the son of the godfather of Las Vegas casinos. I'm making all this up as I go. I'm making all this up as just titles, just storylines, create them as I go. Jack, the few short hours you do have remaining in Tampa, go out and enjoy it. You don't need to be inside talking to us here on the Checkerboard Chatter. It is Jack Byers. You can find him there at the Bulldog Blitz. Dude, Happy New Year. Be honest with me before we part ways. What's your sports New Year's resolution? Mine is to watch more soccer. All my friends are like huge EPL fans, and they're like, "Come on, they made me an Arsenal fan," which is I don't get what that is, and they're fans of like Chelsea and like Manchester or stuff like that. My sports resolution this year was to watch more EPL soccer. What is Jack Byers' sports New Year's resolution?
Well, I've been trying to get more into hockey recently.
Woo!
That's probably what it is. Probably just try to watch more hockey. The only thing that sucks with hockey is because I love the NBA too. It's kind of hard to follow both of them closely just because they're the same season. But
Yeah.
trying to get more into it. It's a pretty fun sport to watch.
Have you pledged your allegiance to a hockey franchise yet?
Golden Knights.
Vegas Golden Knights, slick unis, the Vegas tie. Yeah, that makes – well, you know what? I got to ask them, who's your NBA team? Because I didn't know if maybe they share an arena or if you were going to go somewhere in that neighborhood.
Oh, I'm originally from Philadelphia, so I'm a 76ers fan.
As a Knicks fan, I'm not going to hold that against you. Nor am I going to let Christmas Day come into this chatter whatsoever. His name's Jack Byers. Not only is he a Philadelphia fan, but he's got tied to Las Vegas. He swears he didn't know what the spread was. We believe him. And he gave us all the content we needed when it comes to the late, great Mike Leach and the look ahead to later tonight as Mississippi State makes a travel up to Knoxville, taking on the number 8 ranked Tennessee Volunteers. Hey, Jack, Happy New Year, my friend. We appreciate a few minutes this morning.
All right. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.